Golly, this is going to be fun. Welcome back to Made by J&D. So I've been writing down a few numbers on the old fire truck here, and been looking, just spending some time wandering around the chassis sitting over there from the motorhome, and the fire truck cab, fire truck frame over there. So here are a few details from the American LaFrance fire truck. There's data plates inside. It's unit number 7294. A BC number, not sure what that is, 339359. 1967. Make Alfco, American LaFrance Company. The length, when this was put out the door at the factory, was 26 feet 10 inches. So nearly a foot longer than the motorhome was. But, you know, some of that was overhang off the end of the frame. And apparently it was a water truck. It had a water capacity of 500 gallons. An AFFF capacity of 160 gallons. And that's the stuff that, you know, they've deemed as toxic now. The pump rating that it had was 1,250 gallons a minute at 150 PSI. And a W/turret extension, 14 feet 1 inch. Don't know what that is. Outside of the frame rail to the outside of the frame rail, 33 3/4 inches. The wheels on this are 20-inch rims, and they are 10-inch wide tires. The height of the tire is a 39-inch. The wheelbase on the fire truck, 156 inches. I've been comparing the track and how wide the cab is with what used to be on the motorhome. I'll get that detail now. So the frame rails on the motorhome, outside to the outside, is 64.5 inches. To go to the outside of the wheel here, you add 10 inches on each side, another 20 inches, so that's 84.5 inches total. On the fire truck, it is 96.5 inches wide from the outside of the rim to the outside of the rim. So my objective is to somehow, I've been looking at the frame, it unbolts, this is a subframe, and that just unbolts here. I like the way that's laid out, factory did it, it's good. I'm just going to see if I can just graft the front sub-chassis onto this, onto those rails. And that means the rails on the fire truck are going to have to be widened to where the bogies are supposed to be, and that's at 64.5 inch dimension. At that point, the bogies will come off and I'll mount them onto the frame of the truck. That shouldn't be a problem. Like I said, the wheelbase of this motorhome, from front axle to the front bogie, axle to axle, is 135 inches. On the fire truck, it's 156. The thing is, there's a pair of bogies here. These bogies are 41 inches. The axle to axle is 41 inches apart. So you add that all together, and from the front axle here to the back axle there is 176 inches. That's pretty long. I don't want it that long when I build it. The cab of the truck is actually narrower than the cab of the motorhome was. From the outside of the wheel here, outside of the fender, to the outside of the other fender, 96.5 inches. For me to put the other axle as it sits from the front of the motorhome, that means the outside of my wheels are going to be, I think I wrote it down here, 84.5. So that's roughly 12 inches narrower. Well, I'm not, you know, I was thinking maybe I could cut the cab in half and shorten it and all that, but or narrow it. That's a lot of work. So, but look at the size of the wheel wells here. These fenders, these are 11.5 inches from here to here. I can easily cut out 6 inches and it'll still have a wheel well. Or the fender will still be there. So that's how I'll get that to match up. The wheels will be dragged inboard just because it's already that way. And that should fit all right. But the big problem here, this cab sits a lot further forward than it did on the motorhome. From the center of the axle to just behind where the grill was on the motorhome, and I'm kind of estimating here, but it's about 42 inches, maybe 41 and a half inches. And the front of the truck comes out to, let's say 68 inches. Well, that's a good 27 inches further than it did on the motorhome. Not sure what I'm going to do about that yet. This door is awfully wide. I still might have to chop the cab up a little bit and just move these hinges. I can't really change the front of this, but I can move these hinges back. And that means make the door go into here. Cutting out the door, going around the top of the fender lip here. And that would get me a little bit. I can't move it back 21 inches because that's almost or 27 inches because the door is only 32 inches. So yeah, that means I'd get some of that, but not all of it, and that's okay. It would stick out the front further than it did on the motorhome. I don't want to load up the suspension on the motorhome too much. I mean, it was a big vehicle, but the majority of the weight was fiberglass and aluminum, and doesn't weigh much. Well, that's all good American iron there, and that's heavy. And if it sits out in front of the axle, well, that's just going to load up the front suspension pretty bad. Try to avoid that as much as I can. I don't think I can get around all of it, but I can reduce it somewhat just by moving it back. Yeah. Then the other thing is, how do I place the bogies? Where do I place them in relationship to the front motor? You might want to look onto your YouTube or into the internet, and you can look up something from a movie called the Herkimer Battle Jitney. I think it was, I can't remember the name, of some kind of strange superhero movie. But the Herkimer, sort of the look I'm going for, not quite. And in that, this is going to be more like a big wheel, like the little play toy that a child would have. Big wheel in the front, and I think actually they're starting to, I mean, adults are using these now to make these little things that you skid around corners and such. But it's a big wheel in the front, small wheel in the back. In this case, I'm going to have two small wheels in the back. I've got to get the dimensions right so it doesn't look too goofy. I think no matter what I do, it's going to be goofy. But to achieve that look, it's going to take a different wheel, because that wheel won't bolt onto that wheel, or that hub. However, I have 6 of those wheels, 16.5-inch rims from the motorhome. 7 actually, because I got a spare too. And I've got these 6 of these big 20-inch heavy steel rims from the fire truck. Oddly enough, the front 2 rims are different than the back 4 rims. I don't know why they did it that way, but they're obviously different. I don't know how they did spares. I think the front and the rear you can change them back and forth, but physically right now, that rim is different than those rims back on the back end of it. Doesn't matter. I'm not using these rims for anything anymore. It's just going to be scrap iron to me. But what I'm thinking is to get this set up when I start working on it, I'm going to try to take a rim, or these rims, one of them I'll experiment, and I'll take one of these spare rims, and I'm going to try to somehow cut the center out of that, or cut the center out of this, and weld something up, just temporarily, so I can get the motorhome sitting up where that 20-inch rim would be, and that will keep the proportions right. How this wheel fits inside this fender. However, these 39-inch tires are too big. I can't change the gearing in the motorhome. But you know, people put in lifted trucks and such, lifted cars, and they don't seem to worry about that too much. All it does is mess up their speedometer reading. So that's all I'm worried about. And anyways, I can get 20-inch tires quite easily anywhere. And I'll just match a tire up that has maybe instead of a 39, it'll be a 35 or something else, 34, 32-inch high tire. That's already a 27, that's too short. So it's something in between. Yeah. That's my plan, such as it is. Let's see what we have inside here. It's a very plain interior. as you'd expect. This floorboard, complete open book as far as what you want to do with it. It's just flat checker plate. Seat is a kind of a two-man bench seat with a bucket for the driver. Got a glove box, which doesn't work very well. It's rusty. Not much in it. Can't really shut it. I'm afraid to break it. We got the gear shift diagram. Looks like we got a pressure gauge. What used to hold the microphone for the radio. And some dials and indicators over there. Let's go take a look on that side. I wish these windscreens weren't peppered with BBs or something. Somebody threw rocks at them. If anybody watching this video has an interest in these trucks, or maybe you might know where one of these is, I need a pair of windscreens. They're kind of hard to find, as you would expect. I think this is a Series 900, American LaFrance. I believe the 900 and the Century or the 1000 were the same. I don't know about the 2000. I think the 2000 series was a bigger windscreen. We have a brake pedal and two, I don't know what those are. There's two different pedals there. Kind of hard to get into this driver's seat because it's a genuine bucket. On the floor, we have two switches here. One might be for a horn, one for the lights. This doesn't work, the old regular horn button, although I think it might have used to, based inside here, because there are, well, maybe not. I thought those moved, but they don't. There's really nothing there. So there's no horn button. It's just something to hold that cap on there. Got your regular gauges, fuel gauge, oil. That looks like that is the temperature gauge, amp gauge. There's a giant alternator on this thing. The speedometer, I've heard, even though that says 90 miles an hour, I think these vehicles were maybe 50 miles an hour, if you're lucky. We got the engine RPM and a series of knobs, which are kind of hard to read, but these are for various lamps. This here I think is for the air brakes that you can lock on. This must have had two different ignition methods. It said front and rear ignition. That's the start button there. This one, don't know. And that's just a little light. Here we have a looks like turn signal. Now the gear shift on this, man, if that transmission has any oil in it, it hasn't been worked in a while, because I can't get it into or out of. I can barely get it to go side to side. So it's pretty seized up. Over there, we got some data plate. I think there's a registration plate, patent, some other information about the engine. One neat feature is it had a spotlight on both sides, even though they're broken. There was a dome light here. And if there was a back window here, I think it was very basic, but I don't really think it had a back window. Here are some things you can open to check engine, check the radiator. And there's another one there, I'm not sure what it does. Underneath, it looks like that is a big contact switch for disengaging the battery, don't know. There are little doors here which are the spring holds them open. I don't know if that's for ventilation or just radio access. There's a bunch of wires in there. These doors didn't used to close very well, but I oiled them a bit. Now they work fine. Well, let's take a look at the motor and see what we can see about this. Okay, well, that's where I start. Take the air cleaner off. There's the air cleaner. Nope, doesn't quite clear the roof. There we have a giant 6-cylinder motor. Look at the size of the carburetor on that thing. Good grief. And it's only a 2-barrel. Remains of a seat belt in there. I'll have to see if that motor turns over. But before I look at that, let's try to get the what remains of the hood motor cover out of there. I think if I take this off, I can get to the motor better, and the one on the other side too. I don't think there's anything in here. Wasp nest, battery cable. Some rubber mats, piece of wood. Yeah, this is all rubbish, so I'll just take that out of there. Welcome to the engine compartment. Well, inside there is the motor data plate, which can barely be seen. It says American LaFrance, but I believe the actual manufacturer is Continental Motors Corporation. And that's all the data on the motor. I'm going to try to look that stuff up. It has oddball things like exhaust and intake settings, and a part number. Doesn't actually tell me what the motor is. I'll have to do some research, see if those numbers add up to something. Here's this giant alternator. It implies there's 2 ignition systems. Well, there is. Here's a coil, and here's a coil, and yeah, there's 2 distributors on here. Distributor here, distributor there. It's a 6-cylinder, but there's 2 plugs in each cylinder. So that's redundant. Well, let's check that out. There's an oil dipstick. That's the bottom level, and then the other one's for the top. Let's see where the oil actually winds up. Yeah, that's way overfilled. That smells like gasoline. There's no water. I don't see any water on there. But I think the engine's full of gasoline, which is not a good thing. I don't know if there's any coolant in it. Dry. You've either drained the water, or a hose burst, or the engine's broken. I don't know if this is a 24-volt system or 48 or 12. I did find a tag on it, says it was positive ground. Oh, well, interesting. I reckon that went there. Seems to fit there. Don't know why. Well, solenoids blew up. But that's not the only solenoid here. There's another one here too. So yeah, who knows? Lots of stuff. Well, it's actually going to be Christmas in a few days, but I've got a few moments to work on the old truck here. There's not much holding this on anymore. There's 1 bolt here that comes off, and that just falls away. And then there's 4 bolts here, and that step should, nothing else holding it there. Okay, let's do that. This bolt here is behind all this stuff. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that bolt is behind here, right there. You can see why that's one thing that didn't take off. It's just too hard. That's definitely the clutch. And that pin's, I can't, it's really stiff, really hard to press on. I'll try to take this pin out of here and disconnect, take that little lever off, or the bail. And then I can get to that bolt. It's got to come off anyway. There we go. Not a lot of wear on that. There you go. Okay, that's that one. Serious insulation panel. Yeah, that's attached to there. I don't know what that is. I have to cut it off. You'll notice I got a proper saw now.